Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi. It is Friday, July 7th. President Biden often says that we are in the battle to save the soul of our nation, and there is not a moment in our nation's history when that phrase has rung more true than it does right now. Republicans across the country are threatening the basic values and principles upon which our nation was founded: liberty, equality, freedom, and democracy. And they aren't stopping anytime soon. And that is why 2024 is so important. And that's why reelecting President Biden is so important. But how do we do that? How do we defeat Republicans up and down the ballot? How do we mobilize the largest generation in 2024, Gen Zers and millennials, at the ballot box? Luckily, I am joined by someone who inspires me every day and is a powerhouse on social media and on YouTube. And he is, as you can all can tell, the amazing Tyler Cohen, host of the Tyler Cohen Show, as well as a recently named MSNBC contributor. Brian, it is so great to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Victor, thanks for having me on, man. Excited to do this.
So I have to ask you so much about politics and President Biden and Republicans, but first I need to ask you about Threads, which is this new app, I'm sure as all of us know, that Meta, the company owned by Mark Zuckerberg, launched this week. You and I are both online in creator spaces. I'm wondering how you think this is different from kind of everything out there and what your reactions are. I think it's like 4 to 8 hours since it launched. What are your kind of top line reactions?
I think the reaction is that, I mean, it shows an appetite. It shows the appetite people have to find a social media platform like Twitter that isn't Twitter. And I think it's owed entirely to Elon Musk. I mean, the fact that I think the most recent numbers we got, which was on this morning, Friday morning, was that there were 70 million users. It was the fastest, the fastest any platform has reached 70 million users before. And I mean, I would just imagine that is a testament to the fact that people do not want a platform in the vein of Twitter that's run by someone like Elon Musk, who's just trying his hardest to placate neo-Nazis and far-right, fanboys and whatever it is.
It's so great that we don't have a platform that is kind of catering to the alt-right. And you mentioned Elon Musk owning Twitter, and it's so funny that we have billionaires owning our social media companies. But I have this feeling, I mean, you mentioned the 70 million stat, which is shocking to me. I'm not quite sure how to contextualize this, but I have a feeling that this app is not going to not only be like the new Twitter, but that it'll be an essential component to reaching young people in 2024. And I'm wondering, there's still a lot that we have to learn, but how do you think this app will sort of transform how campaigns, how you're going to reach your audience?
I think that's a great question. And I think the fact that it's built off of the back of Instagram is really going to help it, because I mean, Twitter has a life of itself. It has, it basically has its branding already, and it always felt like a news app. I mean, maybe that's just me being biased because I'm in the world of news, and I'm sure that there's a whole gamer contingent. I'm sure that there's a whole, fashion, whatever it is. But Twitter always did feel very newsy, and I feel like all of the journalists and news personalities on there did really drive the conversation, because this thing is built on the back of Instagram, and Instagram does have the reputation of being so friendly to young people. I mean, that is a young app. There's a reason that it wasn't like Meta introduces Threads or Facebook introduces Threads, that it was built on the back of Instagram. I think that it's really going to create a very low barrier to entry for young people to be able to get on it and then be part of this conversation, a conversation that was happening on Twitter and now where hopefully it can happen on Threads.
Absolutely. I want to shift to talking about President Biden, because for those of us who are watching him closely, I think it's obvious that he's doing such a phenomenal job. But there are still people who still don't seem to be understanding his accomplishments and I guess feeling his accomplishments. Why do you think that is, and how do we begin to change that?
I mean, I think why it is because, we're contending with a right-wing media ecosystem that is really good at messaging and also has no scruples. And so they can say whatever they want. It's not going to matter. They can say this is the worst economy we've ever had. Meanwhile, we have the most jobs ever added in just over 2 years than any presidential term has added even in 4 years. So I think there is that big element of like right-wing disinformation, and it reaches a lot of people. I mean, I have family members who come and say like, what about this? And it's just something they've read on Breitbart, and people don't have the media literacy to know whether something is a legitimate outlet or not. I mean, that's why I do what I do. I first started, my videos because I was getting fed a ton of right-wing videos on Facebook, and that's when Facebook was the principal platform. And I'm like, why is there nobody pushing back on any of this stuff? And so, since then, luckily, we've had a lot of people come into the progressive media ecosystem from you. We have the Pod Save Americas out there. We have the Midas guys. And so, as this media ecosystem continues to grow, we can counter a lot of that. But the fact that the right has owned new digital media, new media for so long has allowed them to kind of push this kind of disinformation completely uninterrupted.
I mean, they've been doing it for decades, which I think is, and they poured in millions into this media ecosystem. And I'm
And
wondering,
they know, right? Like to your point, they know what they're doing. There's a reason that they poured all of this stuff into AM radio and podcasts and YouTube and Facebook videos, all the while the Democrats were completely complacent, allowing CNN and the New York Times to be their mouthpieces. And
yeah,
CNN and New York Times, by the way, have no interest in being the liberal media, and they will bend over backwards to show everybody that they're not the liberal media. And so on the right, you have a right-wing media ecosystem that is unapologetically right wing, and on the left you have a left wing media ecosystem that is unapologetically centrist, and so we really had nobody advocating for our causes.
do you feel like more Democrats are beginning to understand this, like kind of the role that non-legacy media outlets like and platforms like yourself, you mentioned Midas Touch, Pod Save America, are beginning to have in kind of our national conversation, or are they still fixated on those legacy media outlets?
No, I think they get it. I mean, at least the people who have any semblance of some type of communication strategy, I think they get it. I mean, the president sat down for an interview with me, and he also sat down for an interview with Heather Cox Richardson on the same day. I mean, she's a writer on Substack, and so I think they get it. I think they recognize that if you want to reach the people who are not just sitting in front of their TV watching CNN for a couple hours a day, then you have to find people where they are, and where they are is to a much larger degree on YouTube, on podcasts, on Facebook, on Instagram and TikTok and all of these other platforms.
You mentioned misinformation and kind of that whole right-wing ecosystem and just the messiness over there. And one of the things I was talking about with someone the other day was how Democrats often kind of, I think, complain about the wrong issues or kind of fixate on the wrong issues. I mean, think about, like, people who say, well, Biden's too old, or that, he's not delivering bold enough policies. I'm wondering, as someone who is in this space, as we head into 2024, what should be the Democratic unifying message right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. I think on one hand, it's very easy to point to what the Republican Party has become and the extremism that they convey. This is a party that has I'm not just saying this, that they have proven that they're broadcasting right now that they're going to attack women's reproductive rights, that they're going to attack LGBT rights, that they're going to try to ban interstate travel, that they're banning books, that they're that they are extreme on all of these issues that the rest of the country is overwhelmingly on the Democrat side on. So that's one half of it. It's just showing the Republicans' extremism. I mean, that is a gift that they are giving to Democrats by virtue of broadcasting all of this stuff. Yeah. If I was as extreme as them, the last thing in the world I would want to do is broadcast it on a daily basis for everybody to see. But, I guess I'm not trying to win a Republican primary. So that's one half of it. The other half of it is just kind of broadcasting what we've been able to do. In just 2 short years in power, Democrats were able to pass the American Rescue Plan and recover the economy. We have the fastest recovery of any country in the G7. We have the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest climate investment in the history of the world, and we've allowed the government to negotiate lower drug prices. We have the infrastructure package. We have the first gun safety bill in 30 years. We have the PACT Act, which gave veterans health care. We have Democrats have codified interracial marriage and same-sex marriage into federal law. We've reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act. I mean, on and on and on. We have legislation that has benefited people's lives. I mean, and the numbers bear themselves out. We have 13.5 million jobs that have been added. We have the unemployment rate is now at a sub 4% level for the longest stretch in history. We're at a 50-year low right now. So again, like, the legislation that Democrats have been able to pass has borne itself out to such a degree that we should be running on this stuff.
It's incredible. And I think hearing you say that definitely mobilizes people on our side. But what about the Republican side? Are you finding that you're reaching anyone on that side? And if so, how do you do that? And how do you bring those people into kind of our fold and convey those facts to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I've been especially interested in doing. I mean, look, I have a left-wing show. I have to be very careful about like figuring out who my audience is. Sure. And so on one hand, it's easy for me to just, yell into the echo chamber because that's the low lift, right? But at the same time, I think the important part for me is kind of taking the opportunity, at least during my videos, during my interviews, to explain to people like, look at what you get when you work your ass off, when you go to work and you get your paycheck and money gets taken out and sent to the government, would you rather have that money go toward all of this legislation that benefits people so that you pay lower prices for prescription drugs, so that your kids are safer in schools thanks to common sense gun safety reforms, that your roads are paved, that you have bridges that work? Or would you rather have all of these hard-earned tax dollars go toward people like Jim Comer and Marjorie Taylor Greene so that they can wail about Hunter Biden on an endless loop? I mean, like, at some point you have to recognize that you are paying for something, and you can either pay for these people to do nothing, to squander those tax dollars that you work your ass off for, or you can pay to at least get something out of the government, because that money's going there anyway. So it's a matter of what you want to get out of it.
Right. One of the reasons why I love your account and your content is because you don't just focus on the federal level and the national level. You also really give people an in-depth look at what's happening on the state and local levels. And I think oftentimes, just as people who are kind of participants in our democracy, we forget those levels, and it's frightening to see what's happening in those Republican states. So can you sort of contextualize it for our audience, what's happening in those Republican states and why it should be alarming to anyone who cares about democracy?
Yeah, I actually started a show with Mark Elias, who is like the Democratic super lawyer. It's called Democracy Watch. So he talks a lot about what's happening in the states too. But I mean, you look at Florida, for example. That's a great great microcosm of what the Republican Party is doing, because Florida had a 12-week abortion ban, which unto itself is already draconian, is already wildly unpopular. And Ron DeSantis, on a national stage, opted to bring in a 6-week abortion ban, and which is, of course, even more draconian. So there are these abortion bans happening across the country. We look at something that's happening in Ohio, for example, where they're trying to lower the threshold, or they're trying to raise the threshold for constitutional amendments, knowing that we have an upcoming, that they have an upcoming vote to codify or to protect abortion rights in that state. So they're trying to bring it from a simple majority up to a 60% threshold, because they want to do whatever they can to push back against efforts to protect abortion rights in that state. Obviously we have places like Texas, for example, where they're trying to eliminate the elections administration's position in Harris County, the only county where they're trying to do that. That's the biggest county in Texas, 3.5 million people, and that's where Houston is. And they want to instead give the powers that an election administrator would have to instead, like, the county clerk and the tax assessor, so that they can then allow that election to crumble, because these people do not know how to administer elections, and then give the state a predicate to then go in and take over this stuff themselves. And of course, the state is run by Republicans. So in state after state where Republicans have control, they've shown that they're willing to meddle in elections, they're willing to meddle in women's reproductive rights, they're willing to meddle in anything they can to push this agenda that people have proven themselves unwilling to accept.
And do you think the energy and kind of enthusiasm and anger and outrage are there right now among Democrats and people even on the right? I mean, what will it take to get people out there and voting and en masse in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that, like, all of the energy is on our side. I mean, these are issues that Republicans don't have any support over. I mean, you look at, I mean, we saw what happened with Roe or with Dobbs in 2022. I mean, it mobilized people across the country to basically turn the Republicans' red wave into like this tiny trickle, where they weren't even able to take the Senate, and their House majority is one of the smallest, thinnest, most narrow majorities in recent memory. Is that, I mean, that's their big red wave. So that issue still persists. They've proven themselves not only unwilling to pare back their extremism on that issue, but they're actually moving forward full steam ahead. Again, Ron DeSantis is a testament to that, where they had that 12-week abortion ban. They had the opportunity to moderate that position, and instead they went toward a 6-week abortion ban. People recognize that issue isn't going away. It's not something that people are going to forget. And it's an animating issue for a lot of people, especially as younger people continue to get themselves into the electorate. That is something that impacts Gen Zs more than anybody else. And of course, we have the attacks on earned benefits like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But in terms of like getting young people involved, Gen Zs and millennials, that is an issue that animates them unlike any other.
Absolutely. I want to end with one of the most frequent questions I get, which is like, how do you make a difference? How do you kind of present yourself in a world where social media runs everything. And I'm wondering what advice you have to others who want to do what kind of you are doing, or someone who wants to get online and make a difference, especially right now in this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I mean, my biggest piece of advice is just to do it. I mean, I waited so long because I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted to make sure I had the right camera, the right sound equipment, the right setup, and that my scripts were right, and that I was just like, do it. I mean, you're all if you're gonna be online, if you're gonna create content, any of your early stuff is going to be completely hidden anyway. I can guarantee you it will be terrible. You'll be embarrassed at the sight of it. It will not take long before you recognize how bad that content was. So you're gonna unlist it. You're gonna make it private anyway. Who cares? Just get on there and start making something. But then my broader advice for people who may not be looking to like become a content creator, my broader advice here is to like make a difference within your circle. An example that I point to a lot is in Wisconsin. Joe Biden beat Donald Trump by 2 votes per precinct in that state. If only 2 people per precinct had flipped their votes from Biden to Trump, Trump would have won that state in 2020. And so, like, the impact that somebody can make in their circle. And by the way, I'm coming from the point of view of like I had family members who didn't vote. I mean, I had very close family members who for a long time didn't vote. And so like there are people out there. Everybody knows somebody in your family, in your social circle who doesn't vote, who doesn't pay attention to politics, who thinks that the whole thing is rigged or who doesn't understand any of it. And you have the ability to like just reach out to a couple of people, and it can make a big difference. Because I mean, you look at something like Wisconsin, and that's all it would take to flip an election.
I mean, if that doesn't convince everyone to pick up the phone and text one of their friends, 2 of their friends, and I don't know what will. Brian, thank you so much for everything that you are doing to inform us, to keep us educated, to push back against the right. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that you joined me on this show. And I know that you'll also be at Netroots, which will be exciting because I'll be there as well. So I'm excited to meet you in person.
Well, thank you. And thanks for, doing your part to reach out to, to Gen Zs and young people, because that's going to be, that's the whole ball game right there.
Thank you so much, Brian. Have a great one.
Thanks you too.
Bye. Well, Brian is so powerful, and boy, that last statistic, I actually didn't know about that, but it is so kind of exemplary and just crystallizes everything that we're trying to say here about the power of individual conversations, of relational organizing, which I know I've mentioned on this show before. If it took 2 votes per county, if there were, less than 2 votes per county for Joe Biden in Wisconsin in 2020, Donald Trump would have won that state. And that is terrifying to think about. And so that's why in 2024, we can't take anything for granted. We always say that what Republicans are doing right now isn't popular. And yes, it's not popular, but it doesn't matter if it's unpopular. People don't actually turn out and vote against them and vote for, the candidates who will actually protect their lives and make our country better. But I think it's just really telling for the fact that, in 2024, we're going to have to really do our part, have those individual conversations. That is the most important thing we can do. Obama, I think on the last day of his presidency, or maybe it was right after his presidency, he was in Chicago and he said, you must organize and you must talk to people. I mean, that is the most important thing we can all do in our society, is just to have those individual conversations. And we are the messengers that matter most in kind of our democracy. It's not going to be Biden. It's not going to be, MSNBC or even myself. It's going to be the people who who you trust, who on an individual level, because that person better, far more than, someone who's on TV, or far more than a politician. So I think that is the best piece of advice that I've heard all week, and maybe perhaps even all year, is just remember what happened in Wisconsin in 2020 and use that as motivation to just talk to one person a day and think of what that can do, the number of days between now and 2024. And if you get one person to talk about it, and then that person who you get to talk about it then talks about it with someone else, it can be a huge ripple effect. And so I think that's a great piece of advice and something that we should all do. I am going to do that right after this, and I hope you will join me. But next week, we have a stacked lineup of guests for On the Move. So far on Monday, we're going to be joined by Ruth Ben-Ghiat to talk about the rising fascism and authoritarianism kind of pervading the country. And then we're going to talk to Taylor Lorenz on Tuesday, who is a tech reporter at Washington Post, to talk about Threads, Twitter, any other social media platform out there. And we've got a great rest of the week. I will be in Chicago starting on Wednesday for Netroots Nation, which is a progressive conference that has a bunch of speakers, including Maxwell Frost, Pramila Jayapal, which both are people who have been on the show. But I'll have on those people on Thursday and Friday, so you don't want to miss those. It'll be a packed and a really, really exciting week of On the Move, and I know there will be no shortage of news to talk about. So I hope you will join me then. It'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon or on my Twitter page at VictorG2020. You can like it and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Have a great rest of your Friday and have a great rest of your weekend. I will see you all on Monday.